I had learned that rich men like to pretend they weren't afraid of hunger. They sat under low amber light, touched starched napkins, rolled expensive liquor over their tongues, and behaved like appetite was a civilized thing. But I had waitressed long enough to know the truth. The more money on the table, the uglier the need under it. Need for power, need for obedience, need for a room to go silent when they walked in. The private room at La Notte Rossa was built for that kind of hunger. Walnut walls, brass sconces, a long table that could have seated 12 and tonight held only 5 men, which was worse somehow. Less conversation, more intent. I balanced a tray of espresso cups against my hip and breathed through my nose the way I always did when panic tried to get clever. Coffee, wax polish, charred rosemary from the kitchen, cold air sneaking in every time the alley door opened. Familiar things, countable things. My name was Alina Russo. I was 24. I worked 6 nights a week, took pastry classes when I could afford them, and kept exactly one person in the city alive in any way that mattered. My brother, Nico. I also had one humiliating weakness. When I was frightened enough, I stopped trusting my voice, so I served in silence. The first time I saw Luca Morti, the room changed shape around him. He did not enter loudly. Men like him never needed to. He stepped through the doorway in a black coat, still carrying the November cold, and every waiter, every guard, every breathing thing in that room adjusted without appearing to move. Tall, dark suit. No ring, no smile. His face had the severe stillness of a cathedral saint if saints had ever ordered anyone buried. The man beside him, Marco Santoro, I would later learn, looked dangerous in a simpler way. Luca looked like danger after it got educated. I set down the first cup. The silver spoon touched porcelain. A tiny sound, barely anything, but Luca's eyes changed. Not much, just enough for me to see he had heard it too sharply. As if the delicate rattle of metal on china had struck some private nerve under all that polished control. My hands, traitors that they were, started to shake harder. Across the table sat a man with a crooked nose and a silk tie the color of old wine. He was Luca's. You could tell by the way everyone around him performed calm instead of wearing it. He glanced toward the door and mouthed something to the server station beyond my shoulder. After the espresso, "Kill the lights," I froze for exactly half a heartbeat. Lip reading was a habit my life had carved into me before I was old enough to know it had value. Nico had lost most of his hearing at 8. After a fever and the kind of public hospital negligence poor families got told to accept with gratitude. Since then, silence had become another language in our apartment. I read mouths because I loved him, because love got practical fast. After the espresso, "Kill the lights." The tray dug into my palm. If I spoke, my fear would get tangled in my throat and come out wrong. Too slow, too obvious. One of those men would notice. Someone would die before the second syllable. The spoon tapped again. Without thinking, I set my thumb against the hot silver to stop it. The burn bit immediately. Sharp, clean, worth it. Luca looked up, not at my face first, at my hand, at the spoon I had silenced. Then at my eyes. I slid his folded receipt beneath the saucer like I was setting down sugar. 3 words, written in the hurried block letters I used when leaving notes for Nico. After espresso. Lights, his gaze dropped once, lifted. Nothing else in him moved. I went on serving. That was the part that changed everything, I think. Not the warning, not the danger. The fact that I kept moving. Set the second cup down. Turned. Collected the empty bread plate near the older man at the end. My hands were shaking so badly I could feel the porcelain tremble against my skin, but I did not bolt. Did not beg, did not look at Luca like he owed me rescue for being brave in his direction. Fear always asked for something. Mine didn't. "Who's the girl?" the man with the crooked nose asked in Italian. "Staff," Marco said. Luca said nothing. I stepped toward the door just as the lights died. Darkness hit the room, thick and immediate. Then glass blew inward from the alley window. Somebody shouted. Somebody fired. I ducked by instinct, tray clattering from my hand. Men moved around me with the speed of people who had rehearsed violence so many times it had become grammar. A body hit the floor hard to my left. A hand closed around the back of my neck. Not rough. Absolute. Down, a male voice said close to my ear. Luca. I went to my knees. Gunfire cracked once, twice, then stopped with frightening efficiency. The emergency lights kicked in red. One of the men by the door bled through his sleeve. The crooked-nosed man had vanished under the table. Marco was already hauling him out by the hair. Luca let go of my neck only when the room was secure. I looked up because some stupid, disobedient part of me needed to. He was standing over me with a pistol in one hand and my receipt in the other. His face was unreadable, his eyes were not. "Who told you?" he asked. I swallowed. Nothing came. Humiliation flared hot in me. I could talk, I wasn't broken. But fear and adrenaline knotted together and made my voice feel like a stranger. I reached for the order pad on the floor, tore off a blank corner, and wrote. I read his mouth. Luca watched me write it. Then he watched my shaking hand. A strange silence fell inside the ruined room, not the silence of safety. The silence of armed men waiting to see what their boss would do with the girl who had just stepped, somehow, into the center of all of it. "Name," he said. I made myself answer aloud and hated how small I sounded. "Elena." His gaze rested on my mouth for a second, on the stammer I had nearly tripped over and swallowed back. "Elena what?" Russo, the older man on the floor, spat blood and tried to lunge. Marco drove him back down with one efficient kick. I flinched. Luca noticed that too. He noticed everything. "Any family?" he asked. I should have lied. Maybe some cleaner version of my life would have lied. Instead I said, "A brother." His jaw tightened so briefly I might have imagined it. Then he handed the receipt to Marco and looked at me like a door closing. "Take her," he said. My whole body went cold. "What?" "For protection," Marco said, which would have sounded kinder if two men hadn't immediately moved to either side of me. "I can go home." "No," Luca said. It was a quiet word. Calm, final. Worse than shouting. I stood because they stood me up. My thumbs still burned. The room smelled like cordite over coffee now, like something elegant gone rotten. I looked once toward the kitchen door, toward the life I had been in 10 minutes ago. The apron, the tips in my locker, the bus route home, Nico waiting up with one lamp on. Luca saw that too. He came close enough that I caught the colder layer under his cologne. Night air. Stone, something winter hard. "Listen carefully, quiet one," he said, and it was the first time he called me that. Not tender, not cruel, simply as if he had named what I was in his mind and expected the world to keep up. "You warned me. That means someone will assume you belong to me now." I stared at him. He stepped aside and the men guided me toward the service hall. "I don't belong to anyone," I whispered. Maybe he heard the defiance. Maybe he heard the fear under it. His expression did not change. "No," he said, "but you don't go back." The alley door shut behind us. The Morty house stood north of the city, hidden behind iron gates and old trees stripped nearly bare by late autumn. It was not a mansion in the loud way. No gold lions, no ridiculous fountain, none of the tacky violence rich men usually did to architecture. This place had money that remembered shame. Limestone. Black-framed windows. A sweep of dark gravel and clipped hedges silvered by frost. The kind of house that looked polite until you noticed the cameras and the men pretending not to carry guns. I sat in the back seat of Luca Morti's car with my hands, folded so tightly my knuckles ached. Across from me, Nino Bellini turned around from the front passenger seat and offered me a bottle of water and an expression so theatrically tragic I almost forgot where I was. "If you faint," he said, "do it on Marco's side of the car. He has no soul and therefore no upholstery preferences." Marco, driving, didn't look at him. "If you keep talking, Bellini, I'll drive into the lake. You threaten that every week. It hurts now because she's here and I'm trying to appear layered." I stared. Nino sighed and put a hand over his chest. "For the record, I'm the safe one. I have cholesterol." Despite myself, a sound escaped me, not quite a laugh. Close enough that Nino brightened like a man getting paid in sunlight. "There it is," he said. "Human reaction. I knew we could find one before the grave." Marco exhaled through his nose. "You're impossible." No, Nino said sadly. What I am is underfed. Rosa says if I touch her almond cookies again, she'll poison me and make it look devotional. I held the water bottle without opening it. I should have been panicking. I was panicking. But panic, I had discovered young, was not a clean emotion. It did strange things. It made the absurd sound holy. It let one stupid man's low-sodium suffering stand between me and the fact that I had just been taken to a mobster's house because I was useful enough to protect and dangerous enough not to release. By the time the gates opened, my brother had called 6 times. I had not been allowed to answer once. They put me in a second-floor guest room with cream walls, heavy curtains, and a bed so large it looked like a dare. My bag sat on a chair by the door. Someone had collected it from the restaurant. My phone rested beside it like a threat. Useful, visible, unavailable. A woman in her 50s with iron gray hair twisted into a neat knot stood by the fireplace with her arms folded. Rosa Conti, she said, I run this house, sit before you fall. I sat because she said it like somebody's aunt and somebody's general at the same time. She poured tea, real tea. Not the bagged dust I kept under our sink at home. Mr. Morty said you haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. That's not what I said. Her look reminded me so painfully of mothers in old church basements that I nearly obeyed without thought. A plate appeared beside the cup. Toasted bread, ricotta, honey, orange zest. The kind of simple food that only worked when done by somebody who actually respected ingredients. My stomach betrayed me with a cramp. Rosa's mouth softened by 1 degree. There. We're getting honest. I need to call my brother. You will. When he says. I looked at the locked-looking door, then back at her. Do all of you talk like weather reports? No, she said. Only the ones who survive. That answer stayed with me longer than it should have. An hour later, Luca came in without knocking. He had removed his coat, dark shirt, sleeves down, no tie. He looked less formal and somehow more dangerous for it, as if the polished outer layer had gone and all that remained was intent. Rosa rose and left without a word. I stood because I did not know what else to do. Sit, he said. I'm not a dog. No, he said. Dogs bite when they're cornered. You go quiet. Heat climbed my neck. I hated that he had seen it, hated more that he had seen it correctly. He crossed to the small table by the window and set down my phone. Your brother is safe. He's with Dr. Giulia Ferrero at a clinic I use. He was told you're working a private event and your phone died. You use clinics. For the first time, the corner of his mouth almost moved. For many things, I should have thanked him. Instead I said, you had no right. He looked at me for a long moment. No, I had necessity. The difference between the two sat there like a knife. I want to call him now. You will. He glanced at my hands. They were shaking again, smaller now but visible. After you stop looking like the floor might open. I pressed my palms against my skirt. You don't get to decide how I look. No, he said. Only whether you stay alive long enough to be angry. I hated him then, or wanted to. It would have been easier. He told me what little he was willing to tell. The man in the restaurant had been connected to Tommaso Vescari, a rival with old claims on city roots Luca had cut off after taking power 3 years earlier. The lights had gone out because someone expected Luca dead before dessert. My warning had ruined the timetable. That made me a problem for whoever had planned it. So I'm here because somebody else might want to kill me, I said. You're here because they will. His certainty turned the room colder. I looked away first. Out past the dark glass to the line of pines, and the security lights burning low in the yard. And when it's over, he said, you go where you want. It sounded fair enough to be dangerous. I folded my arms. I don't trust you. You shouldn't. That caught me. Most men lied at that point. They smiled, softened, begged to be misunderstood in a flattering direction. Luca simply stood there in my borrowed room and let the truth sit where it landed. I need Nico, I said, quieter now. He doesn't sleep if I'm not home. Luca's expression altered by some hidden fraction. He'll sleep tonight. How do you know? He met my eyes. Because I'm sending Rose's car for his overnight bag, his charger, and the blue blanket in the second drawer under his bed. My breath stopped. I had never mentioned the blanket. He had either had my apartment searched in detail or listened when I didn't realize I was speaking in the car. Both options were alarming. Both options meant the same thing: control. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He could have said strategy, obligation, debt, survival. Instead he said, "Because you touched the spoon." I stared at him. The silence stretched. His gaze slid to my thumb, to the small red crescent where the burn had risen. Some part of me had forgotten it. He had not. "I don't understand," I said. "No," he said, almost to himself. "I know." He stepped forward then, close enough that the room seemed to reduce itself around him. Not touching. Worse. My pulse climbed into my throat. He lifted his hand as if to reach for mine. Then he stopped. His jaw tightened once. The hand fell back to his side. That was the first time he chose restraint, and I felt it like a thing with weight. "Sleep," he said. I swallowed. "In a locked room, in a guarded one. That's the same thing." His eyes moved over my face, steady and unreadable. "No, quiet one it is." He left. The door clicked softly behind him. Only after the sound died did I realize my breathing had changed to match his, as if my body had already started learning the shape of danger. Nico arrived the next morning in one of Rose's wool coats, drowning in it, his dark hair sticking up on one side and his hearing aids gleaming pale against his skin. He was 16 and all elbows, the kind of beautiful that belonged to boys, not yet aware the world could turn on them for being gentle. The minute he saw me in the downstairs sitting room, his shoulders dropped in relief. I crossed the space before anyone could comment and pulled him into my arms. He held on hard. "You scared me," he signed against my shoulder when he stepped back. "I'm sorry," I signed. "I'm okay." That was only half true. Nico read the missing half on my face immediately and glanced toward the doorway where Marco stood like an armed piece of furniture. "Mob," I looked at him sharply. His mouth twisted. "I'm deaf, not stupid." Despite everything, that nearly made me smile. Luca entered a second later and stopped dead when he saw Nico signing. Something invisible moved through him, not surprise exactly. Recognition, so raw it made my own skin go cold. Nico, oblivious, turned and signed more slowly for politeness. "Thank you for helping my sister." Luca said nothing for a beat too long. Then in accented but clear sign, "You are welcome." I forgot to breathe. Nico's entire face lit up. "You sign?" "A little," Luca answered. He signed like somebody who had learned in grief and never stopped hearing the original reason. Precise, economical, no flourish. It made a strange ache rise under my ribs. I had met hundreds of men who saw Nico first as inconvenience, then as test, and only then as boy. Luca Morty saw him as language. That should not have mattered. It did. The morning unfolded in fragments of unreality. Rosa fed Nico eggs and toast and bullied him into taking vitamins. Nino appeared with 3 different pastries in a bakery box and announced he had brought peace offerings, but would be taking one back because nobody here respects the medical fragility of my spirit. Marco took 2 phone calls and frowned through both. A lawyer came and left. 2 guards moved a crate across the courtyard that definitely did not contain olive oil, no matter what label had been nailed onto it. I stood in the upstairs gallery later, looking down into the stone courtyard, trying to fit the pieces of my life back into something I recognized. Nico had been set up in a room near mine. Rosa had found his favorite tea. He was currently beating Nino at cards by way of a face so innocent it should have been illegal. My phone remained with me now. That detail mattered. Luca did not trust me free, but he trusted me informed enough not to panic into stupidity. I watched men cross the courtyard below with the efficient stillness common to places built around one person's gravity. And then I noticed something else. 2 guards by the east gate were talking without looking at each other. One rubbed a hand across his jaw and said, with his mouth more than his voice, delivery moved. Warehouse 7. Don't tell Santoro yet. I went still. Lip reading in noisy places was messy work. Angles, light, familiarity. But I knew what I saw. Marco walked into the yard seconds later. I leaned over the railing. "Marco," he looked up. "The men by the east gate. I said carefully, aware of how ridiculous this sounded in a house like this. They're talking about moving something. Warehouse 7. His expression changed. The guards looked up too late. An hour after that, the house atmosphere sharpened into something finer and more dangerous. Doors opened and shut, men left. Men arrived. Somewhere below, somebody started speaking rapid Italian into 2 phones at once. Nico, wisely, stayed near Rosa. I went to the kitchen, and pretended helping was not another word for needing not to fall apart. Rosa let me pipe cream into shells while she watched a stockpot. "Your hands are steadier with sugar than with men," she said. "Most women can say that. Most women have sense." I nearly smiled. The pastry bag felt familiar in my grip, and familiarity was mercy. Pipe, turn, release. Pipe, turn, release. Sweet ricotta scented with lemon peel, dusting sugar fine as breath. My mother had taught me before cancer took all the spare softness out of her. Nico liked the broken shells best, said perfect things made him suspicious. Rosa nodded toward the tray. "Who taught you?" "My mother. She taught you to make enough for grief." I looked at her. She shrugged one shoulder. "It's a skill." Luca found me there near dusk. He stood in the kitchen doorway while the house moved around him. Men parted without seeming to. Rosa took one look at his face and shooed everybody else out, including me, until he said, "She stays." I didn't know why that raised my pulse. "Warehouse 7, he asked. I wiped my hands. "They said it, I read it. You read mouths that well." "Yes, how long?" "My brother's whole life." He glanced toward the tray of cannoli. "And the pastries? I do those well enough to afford rent." His gaze fell to my fingers, white with powdered sugar now instead of fear. "Useful range." I should have said something clever. I never did around him. "Are they dead?" He knew who I meant. "No," I exhaled. His eyes narrowed, not unkindly. "Disappointed?" "No," I said. Relieved I'm not becoming the kind of person who asks that first. He held my gaze a second too long. Then, for one brief paragraph of time that did not belong to me, I saw him from somewhere outside myself. Luca had known fear on women. He had known manipulation, seduction, strategic tears, practiced surrender. He had known saints, liars, survivors, and girls who mistook recklessness for courage. But this one stood in his kitchen with powdered sugar on her wrists, and answered him like morality was still a choice she intended to keep. Worse, she had signed to her brother with the same hands that had stilled the spoon. He had not wanted that to matter. It did. He looked away first. "Tommaso Vescari used the warehouse shift to test my walls," he said. "He knows I have a leak or suspects one." "Inside this house?" "Yes." The word sat between us like ice. Something moved at the back entrance. Cesare Gallo, silver-haired and elegant, stepped in carrying a leather folder. He smiled at me with grandfatherly gentleness. "So this is our brave witness," he said. I did not like that he said our. Luca took the folder without returning the smile. "Not now." Cesare's gaze flicked to the cannoli, to the sugar, to my face. "Careful, Alina, sweet things in this house don't stay sweet." After he left, I realized I had chilled all over. "Do you trust him?" I asked. Luca's expression gave me nothing. "I trust what men do under pressure." That wasn't my question. "No," he said softly. "It never is." From the courtyard below came the dull slam of a car door, the bark of an order, the metallic sound of a gun checked and holstered. The house had gone from uneasy to armed. Outside, somebody was already moving against us. I understood then that the room at La Not Rossa had not been an incident. It had been an opening. Rain came in hard that night, needling the windows, turning the grounds into black glass. The house settled into the restless kind of quiet that wasn't quiet at all. Footsteps overhead, murmured Italian in hallways, engines arriving and leaving under the weather. Radios crackling low in the security office. I could not sleep. Nico finally had, one arm flung over his eyes, his blue blanket twisted around his waist like a flag after battle. I left his door open and went downstairs barefoot because the marble under my feet was cold enough to distract me. The silver chime reached me before the light did. Porcelain. Spoon. I followed the sound to the office at the end of the West Hall. The door stood half open. Firelight moved across dark shelves, a green-shaded desk lamp pooling light over ledgers, maps, and a single untouched espresso set on a side table. The spoon rested in the cup. Luca stood by the window with one hand braced against the frame, looking out at the rain as if weather required strategy. I should have backed away. Instead, I stepped closer and the floorboard gave me up. He turned. His eyes found me first, then my bare feet, then the borrowed cardigan thrown over my nightdress. Nothing in his face changed, but something in the room did. "You should be asleep. You should too." His gaze flicked once toward the cup. "I didn't ask for company." "No," I said. "You just left a haunted spoon in a dark room and expected nobody to investigate." A strange sound escaped him. Not laughter, the memory of it. I came nearer before I could lose my nerve. On the desk, half under a folder, lay a photograph of a girl with Luca's eyes and softer mouth. 17 maybe, smiling with an espresso tray balanced against her hip. A hearing aid caught the light at one ear. He saw me see it. The silence that followed felt private enough to be dangerous. "Your sister," I said. "Yes," the answer landed heavily. Final. No invitation. I looked at the spoon, then at the small hearing aid in the photograph. "That's why," his jaw tightened. "She used to still it," he said after a moment, "when it rattled. She hated the sound, said it made rooms feel wrong." I looked down at my burned thumb. Suddenly, I understood why he had looked at my hand before anything else that night, why the tiny silver chime had struck him like a blade under the ribs. "What was her name?" "Beatrice." Rain struck the window harder. The office smelled like cedar, coffee, and the colder note I always caught on him, like night air carried indoors on purpose. I should have said I was sorry. The words felt too thin, so I said the truer thing. "You still make the cup." He looked at me then, not coldly, worse. Like I had found the seam in something he kept sealed with both hands. "Sometimes," he said. I took one more step toward the side table. "May I?" He did not answer. I reached for the spoon anyway, and set it carefully against the saucer, so it couldn't touch porcelain at all. When I turned back, he was watching me with the same unnerving stillness he used when deciding whether to trust a room. "What are you doing, quiet one?" "Making it stop." The words came out before I could think better of them. Something in his face gave, not much, but enough for me to feel it. Then the alarm downstairs barked once. Luca moved faster than thought. One moment he was by the window, the next his hand was on my waist, driving me backward into the shadow beside the bookcase as footsteps thundered in the hall. My breath caught hard. His body came between mine and the doorway, one arm braced past my head, the other already drawing a gun from somewhere under his jacket. "Don't move," he said softly. I could feel the heat of him through 2 layers of cloth, the hard line of his chest, the measured, terrifying steadiness of his breathing. My hands lifted without permission and landed against his shirt. I could feel his heartbeat there, slower than mine, stronger, as if panic belonged to other people. The door swung wide. Nino stumbled in first, wearing a bulletproof vest half buckled and plastic grocery bags over his shoes. I stared. Luca did not move. "Good news," Nino said, breathing hard. "No breach." Bad news, the rain drove 3 geese under the west portico, and one of them looked at me with intent. Marco came in behind him, took in the scene, and shut his eyes for one exhausted second. He tripped the exterior sensor with a garden rake. "It was dark," Nino said, "and geese are not birds, they are demons with feathers." I made an ugly sound that might actually have been laughter. Nino pointed at me triumphantly. "See, she agrees. Finally, a woman of judgment." Even Luca's shoulder shifted once, almost imperceptibly, as if he were swallowing amusement by force. Marco's gaze dropped to Luca's gun, then to his hand still spread beside my head. "All clear." They left. The door closed. Neither of us moved. This was the second almost, the worst one yet. Luca's eyes dropped to my mouth and stopped there just long enough to make me forget every safe thought I had ever owned. Then he looked away first, slowly, like control cost him. My hand had slid higher against his chest without my permission. I pulled it back as if burned. He noticed that too. "So," I whispered, because silence had become unbearable. The geese, he lowered the gun. Bellini has many enemies. That should not have made my pulse jump. It did, maybe because he was trying, in his own impossible way, to ease me back into breath. His gaze dropped to my thumb again. The burn had reddened deeper in the heat of the room. Sit, I obeyed this time. He opened a drawer, took out a small metal tin of ointment, and came to kneel before me. Luca Morti did not look like a man who knelt for anyone. The sight of him doing it made something painful and delicate move under my sternum. "This will sting," he said. "You say that like I'm brave." "No," he said quietly, taking my hand. "I say it like I know you'll hold still." His fingers were large, scarred, unexpectedly careful. He spread the cool ointment over the pad of my thumb with the edge of his little finger, the touch precise enough to break me more efficiently than roughness ever could. I noticed then a white seam of scar cutting across his wrist, half hidden under his cuff. He followed my gaze and let the sleeve fall, almost 3. "What happened?" I asked. His expression went still. "A long time ago. That's not an answer. It's the only one you get tonight." I should have pushed. Instead, I watched his thumb settle once, briefly, against the inside of my wrist, where my pulse was still running wild. "I was accepted into a pastry fellowship in Boston," I said suddenly, not knowing why I told him. "In January." He looked up sharply. "I haven't figured out how to pay for it," I added. "But it was mine, before this." His hand loosened around mine, not releasing. "And now I'm in your office at 2 in the morning discussing poultry-based terrorism." That did it. A quiet breath left him, almost a laugh, gone as soon as it came. Then his eyes lifted to mine again and the room narrowed. He could have kissed me. I knew it before he moved, because everything in me had already braced for the loss of distance. He did not. He set my hand back in my lap like it was something he had no right to keep, rose in one smooth motion, and stepped away. "Go back to bed, Alina." The use of my name was somehow more intimate than the nickname. I stood because staying seated felt too much like surrender. "And if I can't sleep," he looked at the photograph of Beatrice, then at me. "Then listen," he said. "The house always tells you when it's still standing." When I reached the door, I looked back. He had picked up the spoon again. This time, before it could touch the cup, he set it silently aside. The next morning began with sugar and accusation. I was in the kitchen because my hands needed occupation, and Rosa, despite pretending otherwise, had started trusting me with her stations. The marble counter was cold under my wrists. Orange peels curled like ribbons beside the cutting board. I stood over a saucepan of coffee cream, whisking gently while cream thickened around the dark bitterness of espresso. Rosa watched from the pastry table with the scrutiny of a woman who could detect emotional weakness by the shape of your meringue peaks. "You're overworking it," she said. "I'm stirring. You're confessing. Use less wrist." I shot her a look. She grunted approval, which in Rosa's language meant affection. Nico sat on a stool by the window doing algebra, with a concentration so pure it made the armed men outside seem fictional. Nino hovered nearby, pretending to help and secretly eating candied orange slices out of my prep bowl. "That's garnish," I said. "Garnish is a social construct," he replied. Rosa slapped his hand with a wooden spoon without looking. "Touch it again, and I'll tell the cardiologist." Nino went pale. "You people weaponize intimacy." For the first time in 2 days, the kitchen laughed. I wanted to stay in that sound. Wanted, absurdly, for a world containing Nino's sodium complaints and Nico's pencils and Rosa's stockpot to be the whole truth of things. But truth had already started moving under the floorboards. Marco entered first, then Luca. The temperature changed 3 degrees. Marco held my phone in a clear evidence bag. My stomach dropped so fast it hurt. "What happened?" I asked. No one answered immediately. Nico looked up. Nino straightened. Rosa set the spoon down very carefully. Luca's expression was carved from whatever stone churches used for judgment. "We pulled the deleted messages," he said. My mouth went dry. I knew before I knew. Months ago, before the restaurant attack, before Luca, before any of this had become personal, A man named Arturo Salvi had started waiting outside Nico's school. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to be seen. He knew my shifts, Nico's route, the exact amount of rent past due after my father disappeared for the final time and left his debts breathing in our direction. He never asked for money first. He asked for information small enough to feel survivable. How many men in the private room tonight? Did the owner switch suppliers? Was there a politician at table 3? Take a picture of the reservation ledger. Nothing that looked like murder. Nothing that couldn't be dressed up as gossip passed under pressure. I had hated myself every time. I had done it anyway, because Nico was 16, because fear with a face on it changed ethics faster than priests admitted. "Say it," Luca said. The whole kitchen had gone silent around us. I looked at Nico and then away, not in front of him. Nico stood so suddenly the stool scraped back. "In front of me what?" My throat closed. There it was again, that humiliating, helpless snag in my voice when fear and shame joined hands. Luca clocked it instantly. "Take him out," Marco said quietly to Nino. "No," Nico signed sharply, furious now. "No." Rose across to him, touched his shoulder, and signed with surprising fluency, "Let the adults bleed where they must." He glared at all of us and let her guide him toward the garden room. Nino followed, muttering, "I hate family meetings." Somebody always survives less than politely. When they were gone, I finally looked at Luca. "I sent information," I said. The words felt like glass in my mouth. "To a collector, Arturo Salvi. He said he worked debts. I didn't know it was your rival at first. Then I suspected and kept doing it because Nico," my voice broke. "The kitchen did not rescue me. Luca didn't move, didn't interrupt." Somehow that made it worse. "What information?" Marco asked. "Reservations, private room nights, delivery schedules, nothing tactical, nothing about security." "And La Not Rossa?" Luca asked. I nodded once. It felt like kneeling. The silence afterward was terrible because it was deserved. "I didn't know they were going to kill you," I whispered. "If I had known, you would have done what?" Luca asked, not harshly. "Stopped. Yes." He studied me long enough to make lying impossible. "Would you?" The honest answer made me sick. "I don't know." Marco swore under his breath and walked away 2 paces before checking himself. Luca stayed exactly where he was, still water over something abyssal. "Arturo is dead," he said. I looked up horrified. "Not by me," he added. "Tommaso cleans his chains when they fray. That's why the pressure on you escalated. He needed to see whether you would break louder under direct fear." I grabbed the edge of the counter. "You think I'm working for him now?" "I think you were coerced," he said. "I think coercion still leaves damage." It should have comforted me. It didn't, because he was right. I pressed both hands flat to the marble, breathing hard through my nose. "What happens now?" Marco answered first. "Now we decide whether you're a liability or bait." Luca's eyes slid to him. Marco fell silent. I closed mine. That was when the coffee cream tipped from smooth to grainy, the heat too high because I had stopped whisking. Rosa lunged to save the pot, swore in low, inventive Italian, and shoved me aside. "Enough," she snapped. "If we're ruining dessert and girls in the same hour, I'm charging everyone rent." I made a helpless sound, not laughter, close to crying, maybe both. Rosa stared at the split cream, then at the bitter espresso reduction still waiting on the stove. "Make it again," she told me. "I just destroyed it." "Yes." That's what trying again is for. My hands shook as I started over. Cream, sugar, yolks, slow heat, care. I added orange zest this time, and a thin layer of burned sugar over the top, once the cups had chilled. Fragile amber shell over the dark, bitter middle. Nino drifted back in at the exact moment I tapped one with a spoon and the surface shattered. "Oh," he said reverently, "that's emotional architecture." "It's dessert," I muttered. "What's it called?" he asked. I looked at the cups lined on the tray. Bitter coffee underneath, sweet cream above it, burned glass on top, beautiful and one touch from breaking. "Second silence," I said. Nino went suspiciously soft around the eyes. "That's upsettingly good." He took one upstairs to Luca's office 10 minutes later because, according to him, I'm a courier of truth and also sugar. When he returned, he lingered in the doorway. "Well," Rosa asked. Nino leaned against the frame and sighed toward heaven. He smiled alone. Heat rushed into my face. "You're lying." "I am dramatic," Nino corrected. "Different crime." That was when Marco came back with fresh information from the gate. A courier had been caught trying to leave a note in the service hedges. No name, no signature. Just 7 words written on hotel stationery. "We know about the boy at the clinic." The room went still enough to hear the refrigerator hum. Luca turned to me, not angry now, worse, certain. "Betrayal isn't suspected anymore," he said. "It's moving." They moved Nico that afternoon, not to another clinic. To a chapel school on Morty-owned land, west of the city, where the old sisters still taught deaf children in 2 languages, and nobody entered without being seen 3 times first. Giulia Ferrero rode with him. Rosa packed his overnight bag herself and added enough food for a week. Nino tucked contraband lemon cookies between the sweaters and informed Nico solemnly that, "If anybody tries anything, scream with your face." "Italians respect that." Nico signed back. "You are very strange." "Thank you," Nino said, hand to heart. "Rosa, did you see?" "The boy loves me." Rosa, pinning a saint medal into Nico's coat lining, didn't look up. "He pities you, different thing." The whole house was in motion, but not frantic. Luca's kind of war was never frantic. It narrowed. Doors opened only when needed. Cars left at exact intervals. Men who usually leaned now stood straight. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before snow or blood. I rode in the second car because Luca said so. He did not explain himself. He rarely did. The chapel rose at the end of a long stand of black pines. Old stone and red brick with a bell tower no one used after dusk. Sisters in gray coats moved children indoors with brisk efficiency as our convoy rolled through the gate. For one impossible second, it looked almost ordinary. Then I saw the rifle flash in the trees. "Luca!" The window exploded. Marco shouted, tires screamed. Luca was out of his vehicle before the first shot finished echoing, yanking my door open with one hand and dragging me down behind the engine block with the other. Gravel bit my knees. His arm came around the back of my neck, pressing my head into the hard shield of his chest, while bullets punched bright sparks from metal nearby. "Stay down." There was no room in his voice for disobedience. Men moved everywhere, Marco firing toward the tree line, Nino somehow both ducking and praying, nuns shepherding children through the side entrance without a single scream. I looked for Nico and saw Giulia shove him through the chapel door, his face white and furious. A second shooter broke from the trees. Luca rose into the gunfire like something carved for it. No wasted motion, no rage on display, just efficiency so absolute it turned the world sick. 2 shots, the man folded, another to the left. Luca pivoted, fired again. Someone behind the stone wall dropped his weapon and did not reach for it twice. I had never seen violence done by a calm man before. That was the moment I understood the true shape of him. Not temper, not chaos, choice. It terrified me more than shouting would have. When the last shot faded, the silence that followed felt stunned and holy. Luca turned back to me immediately. Not to the bodies, not to his men, to me. He crouched, both hands on my face now, scanning for blood. "Where?" I shook my head. He checked anyway. Shoulders, throat, hairline, wrists. I caught the tremor he was not permitting anywhere else. "You're hurt," I said. A dark line ran from beneath his jacket at the ribs. "It's nothing." It was never nothing, not with blood. He got us inside the rectory before anybody could argue. The room smelled of candle wax and damp wool. Somewhere in the chapel, a child started crying and was quickly soothed. Luca braced himself one-handed against a wooden table. The front of his shirt was wet. "It's a graze," he said before I could ask. "Take it off." His eyes lifted. I turned red instantly. The jacket. I meant the jacket. A flicker crossed his mouth and was gone. He shrugged the suit coat off. Blood had soaked through the shirt at the side seam. My fingers shook harder opening the first aid box than they had under gunfire. That embarrassed me, he noticed. "Quiet one." "Don't," I whispered. "Look at me." I did, big mistake. "You're safe," he said. I hated that my eyes burned at that. Hated more that I believed him for one full second. I pressed gauze to his side. He didn't flinch. The muscles under my hand were hard as iron, hot with contained violence. The room had gone too small. I could hear the rain starting again on the windows, softer now, and beneath it all the remembered silver chime of a spoon against porcelain, that first sound that had carried me into this. "I know why," he said suddenly, my hand stilled. "Why what?" He looked down at me as if the answer cost something physical. "Why I keep seeing your hand." I couldn't breathe properly. His voice dropped lower. "You were afraid enough to shake. Any sane person would have stepped back, asked for help, begged. You didn't. You burned your thumb to stop the sound and warned me like my composure mattered more to you than your safety." My throat worked uselessly. "No one in my world does that," he said. "They fear the explosion. You saw the crack before it came." That should have frightened me. Instead, it made my whole chest ache. He lifted his hand then, slow enough to let me stop him, and touched the side of my face with the backs of his knuckles as if he did not trust his palm. Almost 4. "Luca," I whispered, because his name felt like stepping off something. He bent his head. The kiss landed so softly I almost thought I imagined it, more question than claim, his mouth barely touching mine, stopping long enough for me to move away. I didn't. That was my answer. Small. Exposed, the only kind I knew how to give. His hand slid to the back of my neck. Mine caught at his shirt. The second kiss was deeper only by a fraction, enough to turn the room warm and terrifying around us. No hunger without care. No taking. Just that impossible restraint, that terrible gentleness from a man I had watched put bullets through the trees without blinking. The door rattled hard. Nino's voice came through the wood. "I'm not interrupting love, am I? Because if I am, I'd like it noted that this is my personal hell." We sprang apart. Luca closed his eyes once, briefly, as if praying for murder. "Come in, Bellini." Nino stuck his head in, saw our faces, and made the sign of the cross. I knew it. I knew this house was cursed. "What is it?" Luca asked. Nino sobered fast. "Tommaso's people hit Warehouse 3 while we were here. 2 dead, 1 missing. And Cesare says this was only the beginning." Luca's expression changed from man to war. I felt it happen. He touched my cheek one last time, so brief I could have denied it later if I needed to survive myself. Then he stepped back. "Take her inside," he told Nino. "Naturally," Nino said faintly. "Because I'm already underpaid, and now apparently also chaperoning destiny." As he led me toward the corridor, I looked back once. Luca stood alone in the rectory room, blood at his side, jaw set, eyes gone to winter. And I knew with sudden, devastating clarity that whatever had begun between us no longer belonged to safety. War had arrived. War made the house louder and stranger, not louder in volume, in consequence. Every ringing phone mattered, every delay had shape. Marco came back from Warehouse 3, with sutures in his shoulder, and a temper sharpened to wire. Rosa started sleeping in a chair outside the downstairs command room, because men under stress become decorative if left unsupervised. Nino took to wearing a rosary outside his shirt and swearing he could smell betrayal like old salami and disappointment. I didn't laugh at that one. By the 3rd day, I had seen too much to pretend distance. A body in the east garage under a tarp someone forgot to pull all the way down. The bruise blooming dark beneath Marco's bandage when he reached for a file. Luca washing blood from his hands at the kitchen sink as if it were no more remarkable than flour. He did not explain. He did not apologize. He simply turned on the tap and let the water run pink, and something in me split quietly down the middle. Stage 1 was over. Dangerous, but not to me. That lie died in the kitchen. The deliberate message came after midnight. A package delivered through the service gate in a bakery box tied with white string. Rosa opened it because nobody else was foolish enough to get there first. Inside, under butcher paper, lay one of my mother's old recipe notebooks. The blue one with flour in the spine and her handwriting slanting through every margin. On top of it sat Nico's chapel school badge, cracked clean through the middle. I couldn't breathe. He's alive, Marco said immediately. How do you know? I asked, already breaking. Because if he weren't, they'd have sent the hearing aid. The room went very still. Luca took the notebook with both hands, not rough, careful, as if he understood exactly what it meant to hold the dead in paper form. He opened the front cover. A note fell out. Let her watch what your name costs. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was standing there. The next I was across the room, grabbing for my coat, my phone, my keys to an apartment I no longer believed existed in any useful sense. Elena, Rosa said. I'm done. The words came out thin and wild and true. I can't be the reason every room becomes a grave. Luca crossed toward me. I flinched, not because I thought he would hurt me. Because I had seen him hurt others and could no longer keep the moral line neat in my head. He stopped immediately. That hurt in a different way. Giulia can take you and Nico out tonight, he said. Calm, controlled. To Boston, new names for a month. The fellowship starts in January. I stared at him. You knew. I know everything you leave where Bellini can find it. From the hall, Nino shouted, this is slander and also accurate. Under any other circumstance, I would have laughed. Instead, I said, you'd let me go. His face changed by some private fraction. If staying means they keep using your brother to reach me, yes. That was the most painful thing he had said to me, because it was love wearing the mask of strategy. Giulia left within 40 minutes. Nico argued, cried, signed furiously, then finally hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might go. You come after, he signed. Yes, I lied. I rode with them to Union Station before dawn. The city was blue-black and half asleep. Wind off the river cut under my coat. Giulia handled the tickets, the bags, the practical parts of fleeing. Nico kept checking the platform clock as if punctuality could force safety into existence. When the train lights appeared down the tracks, he looked at me with naked panic. You too. I touched his face. I can't. He went white. Because of him, he signed. Luca, because of all of it. His jaw tightened in a way that made him look suddenly older than 16. You love him. The denial rose and died before reaching my mouth. I didn't know what I felt in any clean, survivable language. But I knew this. If I boarded that train, I would spend the whole ride hearing the spoon rattle, seeing Luca in the rectory with blood on his side and my name on his mouth like it mattered. The train hissed into the station. This was the exit point. Real, open, no one was stopping me. Giulia touched my arm. Elena. I looked down at the fellowship envelope in my pocket, acceptance papers, payment schedule, the future I had built one extra shift at a time. I had thought survival meant movement in one direction, away from debt, away from neighborhoods where girls learned silence too young, away from men whose names changed the air in a room. But survival had changed shape. Now it looked like choosing with my eyes open. I bent and kissed Nico's forehead. Go with Giulia. His eyes flooded. I will come for you when I can, I said. And if I don't, you get angry and brilliant and impossible, and you finish school anyway. He grabbed my wrist. Don't stay because you think you owe anyone. The boy had too much of our mother in him. Too much truth, I swallowed hard. I'm staying because I know what leaving means now. The conductor called boarding. Giulia took Nico's hand. He let her, but only after signing one last sentence that broke me clean in two. Then make it a choice. I stood on the platform and watched the train take my brother east. When it was gone, I took the fellowship envelope from my pocket, tore it once down the middle, then again. Not because dreams were childish. Because this one belonged to a version of me that had not yet seen what his world cost and still thought innocence meant absence of blood, rather than refusal to become careless about it. That was the price. I turned around and walked back toward the city, back toward Luca, back toward the dark with open eyes. By the time I reached the gates at sunrise, the house was already mid-crisis. Marco met me in the drive, pale with pain and fury. Where is he? He stared. You came back. That's not an answer. His face altered, not relief, respect maybe, or dread. Tommaso called a sit-down, Marco said. Cesare convinced Luca to go before daylight. Something cold slid into place under my ribs. I had seen Cesare on the phone the night before, his smile too soft, his mouth shaping words to the dark garden window where he thought no one was looking. Warehouse 9. Alone. I looked at Marco. Cesare set him up, I said. And then I started running. Warehouse 9 smelled of rust, diesel, and old winter water trapped in concrete. I never made it to the main floor. A van cut across the loading entrance before I reached the side stairs. A hand clamped over my mouth. A needle bit the skin of my neck. The world tipped, blurred, darkened, then dragged itself back in jerks. When I opened my eyes properly, I was sitting upright in a chair with my wrists bound in front of me and a single bulb swaying overhead. Freight elevator cage, steel mesh walls, grease on the floor. My head throbbed. Across from me sat Cesare Gallo. He looked exactly as he always did. Elegant gray suit, polished shoes, white hair swept back from a thoughtful face. He could have been waiting to discuss foundation donations. That was the worst part. "Good," he said softly. "You're hard to dose." For a second, I simply stared. Then the nausea of understanding hit. The listener might have known before I did. Maybe everybody in the world knew before I did, except the stupid girl in the center of it. But knowing with your mind and watching a trusted face arrange itself around the truth are not the same violence. "You," I said. "Yes." I pulled against the bindings hard enough to burn skin. "Why?" Cesare leaned back. "Because I buried one Morty child already in all the ways that matter. I won't bury Luca because of a waitress." My whole body went still. He watched that land and nodded faintly, pleased. "There it is. You didn't know I was there, most don't." When Beatrice died, I was the one who told Luca it was the cost of men like us building empires. Better one girl than 100 roots. Better grief than weakness. His voice never rose. That made him monstrous in a way Tommaso never could be. "And now?" I asked, mouth numb. "Now Luca is forgetting arithmetic. He sees children where there should be leverage. He spares men who insult him because their wives are pregnant. He signs to your brother at breakfast." Cesare's eyes cooled. "You are not the cause. You are the proof." He had loved Luca once in his way. That was the terrible thing. He was not pure evil. He was a man who had mistaken hardness for love so long he could no longer tell the difference. That made me shake more than hatred would have. The elevator jolted and began to rise. Above us, voices carried through the shaft in distorted fragments. Tommaso's I recognized first, smooth, almost amused, the voice of a man who had never mistaken mercy for strength because he had never wanted either. Luca's came second. Low, flat. Deadly enough to thin the air through steel. Cesare followed my face and smiled a little. "You see, already he sounds different. You're wrong about him. Am I? Or are you?" The doors above slid open halfway with a shriek of metal. Through the lattice I caught slashes of movement, shoes, the hems of coats. I tilted my head and listened harder, because listening had been survival long before men with guns entered my life. "Tommaso, you were always your father's better liar. Luca, and you were always his hungrier dog." Tommaso laughed. Cesare's gaze sharpened on me. "You're reading them." I said nothing. He stood and crossed to the cage door. "That trick of yours is inconvenient." My fear climbed so high it became strangely clean. I tested the plastic tie at my wrists against the edge of the chair bracket. Tiny movement, tiny give. Above us, Tommaso kept talking, not monologuing, prodding. Men like him never explained themselves for art, only for leverage. He had grown under the same old regime Luca inherited, but where Luca cut civilians out of the roots that made money, Tommaso kept them in. Smaller losses, he called them. Girls carrying trays. Boys on corners, families as accounting lines. He was what Luca might have become if he had ever stopped feeling the dead as people and started feeling them only as numbers. Villain as mirror. The worst kind. I worked the tie harder against the metal edge. Tommaso again, clearer now. "The girl comes back to you and you call that strength?" "No, that's appetite with poetry." Luca did not answer. That frightened me more than if he had. The tie slipped 0.5 millimeter. Cesare noticed my wrists too late. He reached for me, but I kicked the chair sideways with everything I had. The bulb swung wild. The elevator lurched. He cursed and grabbed the lattice. I used the chaos to wrench my hands down and threw the strip of loosened plastic hard enough to skin my thumbs raw. The door above was still half open, voices sharper now, feet repositioning. I ran to the panel and hit the emergency stop. The whole cage shuddered to a halt between floors, yells above, below. Cesare lunged. I snatched the loose bulb from its socket and the dark went immediate and total. He swore. I heard him by breath alone after that, and in the dark I was better. I stayed low, moved silent, listened. His shoe scraped left. I slipped right and reached through the outer lattice, waving once toward the narrow gap above, trying to catch any movement from the floor line. A flash of coat. Luca, I couldn't tell. So I did the oldest thing Nico and I had ever invented in our apartment when the lights went out and he needed to find me. 3 knocks. Pause. 2. I hit the steel wall with the bulb base. 3. Pause. 2. Above, everything stopped. Then Luca's voice changed utterly. Nino. Cesare found me by sound and caught my arm hard enough to bruise. I drove the jagged bulb base into his forearm. He hissed, let go, and in the same instant the outer door was ripped upward by force from above. Light knifed in. Luca dropped through the gap like judgment. I will remember what happened next until I die, not because it was fast, though it was, or brutal, though it was that too. Because for the first time, I saw him with grief completely unchained. Cesare got one sentence out. She makes you weak. Luca hit him before the last word finished. Not with spectacle, with devastating, efficient fury, one blow, another. Marco hauling Tommaso's man off the landing. Tommaso retreating backward through the high bay with a gun raised. The world became metal and breath and violence done too close to think. I crawled out of the cage on skinned knees. Tommaso fired once toward Luca. I screamed his name. The shot hit the chain hoist instead. Sparks rained. Tommaso vanished through the far loading door. Cesare, bleeding on the concrete, looked up at Luca with something like pity. That expression would have haunted me more than blood if I'd had room for haunting. Luca turned toward me. The look on his face when he saw my wrists changed everything. And somewhere behind him, too far away and much too late, sirens started to sing. The safe house on the lake belonged to no one on paper and to Luca in every practical sense. Pine walls, black water beyond the windows, a generator hum under the floorboards. By the time we got there, dawn had gone gray and mean over the shoreline, and I had stopped shaking only because exhaustion could not sustain that level of panic forever. My wrists were wrapped. My lip was split, my knees were bruised purple beneath borrowed sweatpants. Nothing was broken, too much was altered. Nino opened the door carrying a shotgun in one hand and a steaming bowl in the other. I made soup, he announced to nobody sane. Also I'm armed but with less confidence than the soup. Then he saw my face. The ridiculousness fell away so quickly it hurt. Madonna, he whispered, and set both weapons down with equal reverence. Rosa is going to flay the whole city. That nearly broke me more than the kidnapping had, because normal concern in a house like this felt unbearable. He guided me to the fireplace and piled 3 blankets over me while muttering, "If you die of exposure after all that, I'll look incompetent in front of the woman I hope one day to legally annoy." When Rosa called from the kitchen to ask whether I was conscious, he shouted back, "Yes. And she still has better judgment than all of us." I laughed once and burst into tears on the same breath. Nino looked stricken. I should not host emotional events. Then he did the kindest thing possible. He left. Luca came in an hour later with blood on the cuff he had not noticed, and fury banked so deep it made the whole room feel narrow. He stopped the moment he saw me wrapped in blankets by the fire. For a long second, neither of us moved. I had imagined rescue as relief, a neat line, captured then saved. The truth was messier. I had stayed alive in that elevator before he reached me. I had cut my wrists free, killed the light, sent the knocks. I needed him, yes, but I had also saved something of myself first. That mattered. Maybe it was the only reason I could bear what came after. He crossed the room slowly, like approaching a wild thing with reason to bite. "How bad?" It took me a second to understand he meant my injuries, not the rest of it. Ugly, I said. Not fatal. His eyes closed once. That was when I knew how close he had come to breaking. He crouched in front of me and touched the bandage at my wrist with one finger. Not quite contact. As if confirming I remain material and not some punishment his mind had invented. I should have known, he said. About Césaire. About all of it. His voice was roughened by something more private than anger. I wanted to comfort him, that frightened me. But the truth had become simpler since the elevator. Simpler and much more expensive. He loved you, I said. He loved control. Those are not always different for men like you. A humorless breath left him. No, this was almost 5, not physical now. Worse, the almost of saying the thing under the thing. Of stepping toward the edge and refusing yourself the final inch. He sat back on his heels. Tommaso took the south route while we were moving you. 2 judges have already switched sides. 1 alderman disappeared. Marco thinks he'll make his stand at the Old Navy freight terminal. And you? I know he will. Because Tommaso needed spectacle where Luca preferred endings. Because mirrors always begged to be seen before they shattered. I was beginning to understand men like them more than I wanted. What happens to Césaire? Luca's face went entirely still. He lives long enough to testify. That answer should have eased me. Instead, I heard the cost in it, the restraint. The fact that killing the man would have been easier and perhaps kinder in the short term, but truth required uglier patience. I looked at the fire. He told me he was there when Beatrice died. Silence. Then, in one brief pressure valve paragraph of his mind, I felt Luca from the inside. He had spent years making a religion of control, so he would never again kneel by a body carrying family blood. Césaire had taught him how to count losses, trim mercy, harden the edges until leadership looked like survival. Then Elena had come into a private room with shaking hands and a burned thumb, and refused to ask for rescue like a supplicant. She kept making him choose the man he wanted to be over the one trained into him. It was becoming unbearable. It was also the only thing keeping him human. He rose and went to the window before I could answer feelings he had not spoken. I can still take you east, he said. I stared at his back. This again, the offered exit. The possibility of a cleaner life held out with both hands by the man most capable of ruining it. Maybe that was love already. Maybe it had been for a while. I already chose, I said. He turned. I know what you are, I said, voice shaking now for reasons fear alone could no longer explain. I know what happens around you. I know people bleed because you exist in rooms they want. And I know I should hate that more simply than I do. The fire popped. I swallowed hard. I'm not staying because I'm trapped. I'm staying because when the dark actually comes, you put your body between it and mine before you remember your own. That should matter. He stared at me as if I had struck him in some internal place with no scar tissue. Elena, the way he said my name this time nearly undid me. I'm still angry, I whispered. I'm still horrified. I still don't know what this makes me. He came back to me then and took my face in both hands, not asking with words, asking with everything else. I leaned into it before I could think myself out of the truth. The kiss that followed was not careful in the way the chapel one had been. It was desperate and restrained at once, the sort of contradiction only grief and relief can make coherent. When I climbed into his lap, it was without boldness, without any brave speech, just the blind instinct to get closer to the one place my body had started believing in. He made a sound low in his throat and stopped us there, forehead to mine, both hands locked at my waist as if holding himself still required leverage. Quiet one, he said, breathing hard. If I keep going, I don't stop correctly. My eyes burned. I know. It cost me everything to say the next part. Then don't because I'm hurt. Don't stop because you still can. His whole face changed. That was the first truly intimate thing between us, not what happened, but what didn't. His mouth at my temple. His hand steady against my spine. The fire warming our knees, while outside the lake kept slamming itself against the shore like weather was another form of grief. Later, when Marco called from the porch to say Tommaso had made his move at the freight terminal, and one of them might not come back from ending it. I already knew. Love had stepped fully into the room, and so had death. The Navy freight terminal was a cathedral built for cargo and ruin. Steel beams vanished into shadow. Broken windows let in strips of lake-gray morning. Old tracks cut the concrete floor in parallel lines like scars that refused to fade. Tommaso had chosen it because echoes loved him there, because spectacle looked noble from a distance. Because men who confuse theater for power always need witnesses. He got them. Luca's people moved in from 3 sides just before dawn. I was not supposed to be there. Marco said it 5 times. Rosa said it once with enough force to count as scripture. Nino said, I support women's choices in theory, but this one is personally ruining my blood pressure. I came anyway. Because 2 nights earlier, before Cesar took me, I had read a phrase on his mouth in the garden window and not understood it fully until the terminal map lay open on Marco's desk. North Catwalk. Mirror angle, sniper language. They needed somebody who could watch mouths through glass and smoke when radios failed or lies got layered over action. They needed me, not as bait, not as burden. As skill, that mattered too. I stayed low behind a line of rusted crates near the east wall with binoculars and Marco's backup radio clipped to my coat. The metal smelled like wet pennies. My knees ached. Above, the catwalks webbed the air in black grids. Men moved there already half seen. See anything? Marco's voice crackled. 3 on South Beam, 1 limping, 1 chewing gum. 1 pretending he's not afraid. Nino, somewhere west, muttered over the channel, if he's chewing gum in a firefight, he was not raised with enough religious guilt. Then the shooting started. The first volley blew glass outward from the office mezzanine. Men dropped behind forklifts and concrete bollards. Marco's team returned fire in hard, economical bursts. Luca moved through the center lane with that same terrible calm I had seen at the chapel, coat gone, black shirt open at the throat. Weapon an extension of will rather than anger. Tommaso appeared on the second-level gantry, as if he had staged the light himself. Tall, silver at the temples, beautiful in the expensive, spoiled way some men remain beautiful long after cruelty should have ruined the symmetry. You always did prefer front doors, he called. Luca didn't answer. He shot the spotlight above Tommaso instead. Darkness crashed down 1 level. I lifted the binoculars and found the north catwalk. 2 men, 1 prone, 1 watching the floor below. The watcher turned his head to shout. His mouth shaped 1 word I knew too well. Now, sniper north, I screamed into the radio. Mirror angle left of the pulley wheel. Luca pivoted in the same instant. The shot meant for his spine struck the railing beside him, showering sparks. Marco dropped the sniper before the man chambered a second round. Tommaso's laugh echoed down through the steel. There she is! He knew I was here. Of course he did. Men like him always looked for the soft point in another man's armor, and Luca had made the shape of his too obvious by now. I shifted position. Bad idea. A second shooter caught the movement and fired. The crate beside me split. I threw myself flat. Dust and rust filled my mouth. Elena, Luca's voice snapped through the radio. I'm fine. A beat. Then stay where you are. As if he got to order the geometry of bullets. As if I would always obey. The answer rose in me hot and ridiculous. Maybe. Through the gaps in the crate line, I saw Neen, hustling between cover with an ammunition bag banging against his hip and terror, arranged theatrically across his face. I hate every career path that led me here, he announced to no one and everyone. Then he lobbed a spare magazine to Marco with perfect aim and shouted, If I die, tell Rosa I died sodium-conscious. Even Marco barked 1 stunned laugh. Then Tommaso came down from the gantry. He wanted Luca face to face. Of course he did. The room tightened around them. Gunfire elsewhere, yes, men moving, steel ringing. But the center of the world became 2 men walking the same old line toward opposite conclusions. Tommaso in the shape of inherited appetite. Luca in the shape of restraint sharpened by loss. Your father would hate what you became, Tommaso said. Luca kept walking. You became what he wanted. That should embarrass you. Tommaso smiled. And yet I kept more of this city than you ever will. By spending women and children, by understanding price. There it was, the line between them, clean as a blade. Tommaso lifted his gun toward me, not because I was nearest, because he knew. Luca crossed the distance before thought. The shot went off. I saw the impact hit Luca's shoulder, and still he kept moving, slamming Tommaso against a support column hard enough to dent metal. His weapon skidded across the floor toward the track line. I ran. Maybe stupid, maybe inevitable. Tommaso reached for a second gun at his ankle. I got there first and kicked it under the wheels of a dead pallet jack. He backhanded me hard enough to put stars across my vision. Then Luca had him by the throat. No monologue, no declaration, just that same frightening efficiency. Tommaso laughed blood into his own teeth. "She'll make you soft." Luca's expression did not change. "No, she made me choose." Then he ended it, not messily, not cleanly either. Nothing about that moment was clean. Tommaso died looking almost relieved, as if at the very last second he had understood that losing to a man who still counted the human cost was a kind of sentence all its own. Across the terminal, Cesare, brought in under guard for transfer testimony, had somehow gotten a hidden knife. Marco shouted too late. Cesare drove it into one of Luca's men and turned the blade toward himself. Luca reached him first. Their eyes met. I will never know what passed there in full. Mentor, son not son. Love deformed into doctrine. Whatever it was, it cost Luca more than killing Tommaso had. Cesare said one final thing I only partly caught. Better feared than buried. Luca took the knife away and held him down until the police detail stormed in. Cesare lived, which, in its way, was the harder sentence. When the shooting finally stopped, the terminal seemed too large for the quiet left behind. One of Marco's men was dead. 2 more bled on stretchers. Nino had a torn sleeve and kept insisting it was emotionally fatal. Luca stood in the middle of it, all with blood on his shirt and grief in his jaw, and looked older than he had that morning. I went to him. He turned at the sound of my steps. Not boss now, not even war. Just the man who had bled in a chapel and stopped himself at a fireplace because I mattered more than momentum. I touched his uninjured shoulder. His hand covered mine. Around us, the last sirens folded into distance. The terminal exhaled. Somewhere overhead, glass dropped from a cracked pane and shattered small and bright against the concrete. It was over. Winter settled after the war in practical ways. Lawyers first, then funerals. Then meetings where men in dark coats spoke softly about routes, judges, missing funds, and whether the city preferred its criminals controlled or merely invisible. Tommaso's name emptied itself out of certain neighborhoods over the course of 6 weeks. Cesare lived long enough to testify to 3 murders, and one old bombing nobody had expected to see reopened. After that, the prison infirmary took him, and no one in Luca's house spoke of him again unless necessary. Necessary happened less often as Christmas lights went up across Chicago. Nico came back in January with better grades, a sharper jawline, and a letter from the Boston Fellowship office informing me that my place had been forfeited and offered elsewhere. I read it twice at the kitchen table while snow lit the windows blue. Then I folded it small and placed it under my teacup like paper could be made to hold the weight of a life not chosen. Luca found me that way. He had started knocking, a small thing, not small to me. Bad news, expired news. He looked at the folded letter, then at me. "Do you regret it?" I could have lied to make him feel easier. He would have heard the seam. "Sometimes," I said, "not you." The cleaner version of myself I thought I was saving. He came farther into the room, not close enough to crowd, close enough to answer. "I regret what my world asked you to learn." That was as near to apology as Luca Morty ever came, and because he almost never reached for words, each one landed heavier than most men's speeches. Rosa banged in from the pantry with a sack of flour under one arm and looked between us with the annoyance of somebody interrupted in the middle of loving people badly. "If either of you intend to make tragic faces, do it away from my dough." Nino followed carrying candied citrus and a bouquet of supermarket carnations so aggressively pink they looked criminal. For you, he told Rosa with solemn devotion, because surviving me deserves recognition. She glanced at the flowers. These are hideous. They were all the florist had left. That's because God wanted to spare me, Nino sighed. One day you'll stop resisting the obvious. Death, us. Rosa smacked him with a dish towel, and for the first time since I had known her. Tuck the flowers into a jar, instead of throwing them out. Nino saw, went silent, then immediately ruined it by wiping at imaginary tears and telling me, witness this. I'm essentially engaged. Later that night, after Nico had gone upstairs and the house softened into domestic sounds instead of strategic ones, I was at the kitchen table rolling out pastry for blood orange tarts when Luca came in from the cold. He set his gun on the sideboard before approaching me. Another small thing, not small to me. Snow melted on the shoulders of his coat. His hair was damp. He smelled like winter and cedar and the city after dark. I kept my eyes on the dough because looking up too quickly had become dangerous. You still overwork it when you're thinking. I kept rolling. You still sneak up on people raised Catholic. I knocked. You entered anyway. A pause. Then, Elena, I looked up. He was holding a ring box. Nothing in me moved for one full second. Then everything did. It was not a fairy tale presentation. No kneeling in candlelight, no violins, no speech pre-packaged for applause. Just Luca, standing in Rosa's kitchen with snow at his collar and caution in his eyes, as if this was the one negotiation in his life he could not afford to handle like business. I don't know how to ask this gently, he said. That nearly made me laugh. Good, I whispered. You'd sound possessed. His mouth shifted, the nearest thing to a smile, then it went serious again. You know what I am, he said. You know what this house is. It won't become clean because I love you. I won't promise that insult. The box clicked open. Inside, set in simple gold, was a small diamond flanked by two tiny sapphires the color of midnight water. My mother's stones, he said. Reset, not to erase where they came from. To change what they mean. My throat closed. He stepped one pace nearer. If you take this, it's with full knowledge, full choice. Your brother remains yours. Your work remains yours. Your no remains yours. But your life is tied to mine in public as well as private, and the city will understand it that way. There it was. No fantasy, just truth made ceremonial. I set the rolling pin down because my hands had started to shake. Not from fear alone anymore. That was the terrible difference. You make proposals sound like legal indictments. It's a weakness. It's a disease. Something eased around his eyes. I wiped flour from my fingers onto my apron and breathed once, twice. I don't need clean, I said. I need real. His gaze changed. That was almost 6. The almost of crying instead of kissing, because sometimes emotion arrived wearing the wrong face and still told the truth. Yes, I said. It came out small, unsteady, entire. Luca crossed the remaining distance, so slowly I could feel the care in every inch. He slid the ring onto my hand like he was learning reverence against his will. Then his thumb brushed my knuckles once. Quiet one, he said. Nothing cold remained in the nickname, nothing observational. It had become home in his mouth somewhere along the way. I reached for him first this time, not with boldness but with certainty. Flour on my wrists and tears I wasn't going to apologize for. He bent and kissed me in the middle of the kitchen while Rosa, from the hall, shouted, If anyone ruins my tart shells, I'm canceling the wedding. Nino answered instantly, Too late. Signora of my impossible heart. Love has risen, I laughed against Luca's mouth. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead to mine and closed his eyes as if ordinary happiness required just as much courage from him as violence once had. Outside, snow fell over the dark grounds. Inside, the dough waited patiently under a dusting of flour, and for the first time, the future sounded almost ordinary. 9 months later, the house sounded different, not safer. I had learned better than to use that word lazily, but lived in, human. The silence no longer belonged only to armed men pretending stillness. It belonged to mornings, to bread rising under cloth in Rosa's kitchen, to Nico studying at the long dining table with one hearing aid out because he claimed calculus sounded better one-sided, to Nino arguing on the phone with his cardiologist while sneaking pancetta and denying it to God in the same breath. It was Sunday, late spring. The windows were open to a warm wind carrying cut grass and lake damp. In the courtyard, Rosa stood among basil pots directing two gardeners like a field marshal of tomatoes. Nino trailed her with a watering can and the dreamy expression of a man who mistook long-term irritation for courtship because, in his case, it probably was. "I'm telling you," he said to me as I arranged espresso cups on a silver tray. "She called me unbearable in a softer tone this morning. We are progressing. You're delusional." "No. Delusion is thinking Luca Morty is intimidating. Progress is knowing he's house-trained around you." From the doorway, Marco said, "Don't let him hear that if you value your knees." I smiled and set the spoons beside the cups. My left hand, ring catching the light, paused for half a second over one of them, not because I was afraid, because something in me still marked the memory. The silver, the porcelain. That small first sound at La Notte Rossa when everything had broken open. I touched the spoon with my thumb before it could strike the cup. Stopped it. For one suspended heartbeat, the whole story returned in the gesture. The private room, the burn, Luca's eyes on my hand, the train platform, the freight elevator, the fireplace, choosing him. Being chosen back. "Careful," Nico signed from the table without looking up. "You're doing the thing again." I turned. "What thing?" "The world goes away for a second." I laughed softly. "That's rude. It's observant." Marco took the tray from me before I could answer. "He's in the West office." "Thank you." "He's pretending to read numbers," Marco added. "He's actually waiting for you." That warmed me more than I let show. I walked the West Hall slowly, feeling the ordinary weight of the tray in my hands. Sunlight striped the floorboards. Somewhere downstairs, Rosa shouted that if Nino watered the basil with sparkling mineral water one more time, she would bury him under it. His answering plea, "It has a better mineral profile," followed me all the way to the office door. I knocked. Luca's voice came from inside. "Enter." He was by the window again, the same place. Different season, different man, no rain tonight, no emergency alarms, just late afternoon light on bookshelves, a ledger open on the desk, jacket slung over the chair back, tie loosened. He turned at the sight of me, and whatever the numbers had been ceased to matter. His gaze went first, as it always did, to my hands, to the tray, to the spoon I had already silenced. The look that crossed his face then was so nakedly human it stole my breath. Not shock, not even grief exactly, recognition with no wound left hiding behind it. "You did it again," he said. His voice was quiet enough that it changed the air. I set the tray down on the side table and looked at him properly. "Did what?" He came toward me slowly, not because he had to think about the distance, but because he always seemed to understand when a moment needed room around it. "The spoon," he said. "You stop the sound before it happens." My throat tightened. In the beginning, that detail had belonged to fear, to instinct, to the kind of control you snatched with your bare hands when everything else was about to go wrong. Now it belonged to memory. And to him. I glanced at the cup. The silver spoon rested harmlessly against the saucer, my thumbprint still faintly visible in the polished curve. "I didn't even think about it," I said. "That's what scares me." I smiled a little. "You scared?" His mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, better, something realer and rarer. "Only by specific things." He stopped in front of me. Close enough that I could smell the day on him. Cedar, paper, clean soap, and the colder edge that never fully left, as if some part of him would always carry the outside dark indoors. But it no longer frightened me in the same way. I had learned the temperature of his silences. Learned the difference between the stillness that meant danger and the stillness that meant he was feeling something too large to trust to words. His gaze dropped to my left hand, to the ring that still startled me some mornings when sunlight hit it. Then he looked back at me. "In the restaurant," he said, "you were shaking badly enough I thought the cup would fall." I let out a soft breath. "I remember. You burned yourself to stop the noise." I tried to shrug it off, the way I always did when something mattered too much. It was only a spoon. No, his hand lifted and settled at my waist. Warm, certain. It was. The room went very quiet. Outside, I could hear Rosa yelling about Basil and Nino, protesting in the voice of a doomed saint. Down the hall, Nico laughed at something Marco had said in the dry tone he used when he forgot children were supposed to find him intimidating. The house was full, alive, ordinary in fragments. And in the middle of all that ordinary life, Luca looked at me like he was standing again in the wreckage of the first night he saw me. "You did something no one had ever done for me," he said. I swallowed. He touched my thumb then, the same thumb that had blistered in Chapter 1, though the skin had long since healed. His touch there was so gentle it almost hurt. "You protected the room before yourself," he said. "You saw the break before the violence. You always do." I looked down because if I didn't, I was going to cry too quickly, and I hated crying too quickly in front of him. It never stayed graceful with me. It always arrived like weather. "When Nico was little," I said, "I used to do that at home too, stop little sounds before they turned into bigger ones. A pan rattling, a dropped glass, the floorboard outside his room." My voice thinned and I had to begin again. I think I got used to believing if I could quiet the small things fast enough, the worst things might not happen. Luca's hand moved from my thumb to my chin. He tipped my face up. "That didn't save you," he said. "No, it didn't save Beatrice either." The name sat between us softly now, not like a wound freshly touched, more like a scar neither of us pretended wasn't there. "No," I whispered again. His eyes held mine, dark, steady, entirely awake. "But I see you do it anyway," he said, "and it still lands the same." Something in my chest gave way all at once. I laughed once through tears I had lost the battle against. That was a terrible attempt at romance. It was honesty. That's worse. For me, yes. I put a hand flat against his chest. The beat of his heart was strong beneath my palm. Still, that same terrible steadiness. Still the safest place I had ever made peace with not fully understanding. "When did you get so talkative?" I asked. His hand tightened at my waist. "Living with you has consequences. Poor man, the poorest." I leaned up and kissed him before he could say anything drier. He answered instantly, one hand sliding to the back of my neck, the other staying where it was at my waist like he still thought, on some level. That holding me required reverence more than possession. Even now, even after everything, when we parted, he rested his forehead against mine. "Rosa wants us downstairs in 10 minutes, I said. "She can wait." "Nino can't. He'll eat the almond cake center before dinner." "That's between Bellini and God." I laughed, and this time the sound felt light enough to keep. He drew back just far enough to look at me again. There it was, that expression I had once mistaken for coldness, and now recognized as the deepest form of attention he knew how to give. "Quiet one," he said. The nickname no longer felt like being observed. It felt like being known. I touched the spoon once more before lifting the tray again. Same gesture, different life. When we reached the door, he took the heavier end without being asked. That, maybe, was the most radical thing of all. Not that the city still feared his name. It did, not that danger had vanished. It hadn't. Somewhere beyond these walls, men still counted power in blood and leverage, and weakness found quickly enough. But inside this house, the man who once measured survival in controlled violence took the tray from my hands because he could. Because love, when it was real, kept showing itself in the ordinary ways. At the end of the hall, Nico appeared with a stack of books under one arm and looked between us with open suspicion. "You're both late," he signed. "Your brother-in-law is dramatic," I signed back. Luca, without missing a beat, signed, "She is worse." Nico actually grinned. From downstairs came Rosa's voice, sharp, affectionate. "Impossible," followed by Nino shouting that if anyone touched his special reserved cannoli, he would leave this family and join a monastery with better pastry boundaries. I looked at Luca. He looked at me, and for one impossible, quiet second, the whole life we had built sat there between us. Not clean, not easy, not innocent in the way I had once defined innocence, but chosen. Fully. Awake, hours, I pressed my thumb gently to the spoon so it wouldn't strike the porcelain as we walked. This time, I wasn't trying to stop disaster. I was protecting peace. We went downstairs together. Some loves save you. Some cost you the person you thought you would be before they could. If loving Luca meant surviving the dark and becoming someone stronger, stranger, and less untouched than the girl I had been, was that a loss, or was that the truest kind of life? Would you have chosen Luca and let the old version of yourself disappear for a love like that?